Welcome to America with an Accent that today introduces a new segment. For us newcomers, staying informed about our countries of origin is as important as staying informed about happenings here in the United States. America and Friends is an occasional series that will bridge that interest by producing segments on different events from around the world. We start with the Australian fire. Dr. Thomas Bragg, a professor of ecology in the Department of Biology at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, has conducted research on fire effects on plant dynamics in Western Australia. Now, NAM, in collaboration with UNO and input from the Department of Environment and Energy of Australia, brings to you America and Friends. What have we learned from the Australian fire? This season fires in Australia are unprecedented and resulted in the loss of 33 lives, property, and have devastated large areas of bushland, killing many native animals with estimates of over 1 billion. A spokesperson for the Department of Environment and Energy of Australia said in an email to NAM. Preliminary analysis by the department indicates that there are 49 nationally listed threatened species that have had more than 80% of their known or likely range affected by the bushfires this season. Professor Thomas Bragg.
My specialty is plant community ecology with a specialization within that about fire ecology. And so I'm involved with prescribed burning grasslands around here, and my research in Australia, which is how I got to Australia, is also about fire. I also teach. I have several courses that I teach, including fire ecology.
Have you been to Australia since you conducted research on?
Oh yes, we went, I think I've been there 11 or 12, 13 times for different research projects. So I've been involved with the Western Australia. That's mostly where we spend the time, in the Western Australia state of Western Australia.
And that's why you're here today, because we're talking about fires in Australia. I understand that they are in the eastern part of the country, or the continent for that matter, but still though, your thoughts are very much appreciated. And I would like to start with a question that we all had when this fire started. Why is Australia home to so many unique species, animals, pine? I read about those pines that are 100 million years old.
Well, there's many, many species there that are unique only to Australia. That's because about 180 million years ago, it separated from the larger continent, which drifted north and became South America and Africa. And so it's been isolated for 180 million years, and the process of evolution in that community has created organisms that are adapted to a set of conditions with no gene flow outside the continent. So it's a result of selection within the organisms there to be on the Australian continent, including fire, which was a large part of the system. Initially it was a tropical area, but then as it drifted south and changed the environment, fire came in. And so the reason why there's so many species there is because it's been 180 million years. It's been separated from the remainder of the major continents in North America.
And let's move to fire now.
Sure.
What is planned burning?
Planned burning or prescribed fire or controlled burning all means the same thing. It's when you actually set up the site and intentionally burn it. And so you control the time the fire occurs, you control the conditions because you don't burn if the weather's too hot or too dry or whatever it happens to be. And you also have areas around it that lines that you can control. So you pick the time, place, and conditions under which you burn. And the idea of most controlled fires, other than managing land to be kind of the way it historically was managed, because fire was part of the natural environment, the controlled fires are designed usually most of them end up being like what they call fuel reduction fires. They call them differently in Australia, but they're basically removing the fuel. And when you remove the fuel, it means when a fire does come, the fires are not as intense.
And fuel in this case is the plants, is that right?
Yeah, the fuel is actually the plant material that dries up. In Australia, the plants are revolved with fire, and so the Australian eucalypts, which dominate most of the landscape, at least along the wetter areas, it burns green. It's got a lot of oils in it, a lot of material in it that is easily burned. So it can burn green. It doesn't have to dry up to burn. And it's very hot fires. But the plants are adapted even to surviving that. The trees themselves actually, many of them survive a fire and start growing almost immediately afterwards.
And this planned burning is nothing new to Australia. Then we have the situation. What went wrong this time?
Well, it wasn't what went wrong wasn't so much what went wrong. It was just that the conditions were more severe than before, and they have not been able, because there's been some interest in not supporting the prescribed fire by, not so much by the fire community, but by others, that they have not actually done prescribed fire over a large enough landscape. So there's a lot of places with a lot of fuel, and now you have drought conditions. It's in a drought area, it's been dry for many years. Hot, dry winds come across, very strong winds, and you have the conditions basically for these mega fires, that several little teeny fires that occur all converge into one big one. Because what happens with the fire is it draws the wind in, and so if you have a fire here, here, and here, the wind is actually rising hot air, and you get this mass of air that just creates their own. They eventually turn from small fires into bigger, into larger fires.
How long will it take for nature to recuperate, or will it ever be back to where it was before this fire?
As I said, many of the trees will come back quickly. The plants are adapted to fire. Many of them survive below ground. The root systems are below ground, so there's really not a lot of those plants will be coming back fairly quickly. The animals, it depends. Most of them, as I said, the system is adapted to fire, and so even the animals will come back at some point. The problem is that if a fire occurs too frequently after this one, and that can occur in the right conditions, and the plants don't get tall enough to act or get old enough to produce seeds, then there'll be there'll be no seeds left for the next fire. And so one of the big concerns, particularly in Western Australia, is that the fires are too frequent now to maintain certain types of shrubs and things that maintain a lot of different animals. And of course, if the plants go, the animals go with them.
There are a number of regional areas where authorities are still working to restore electricity and communication services. Once it is safe to enter fire-affected areas, it will be possible to better assess the severity and extent of impact on the ground. The length of time required for recovery will depend on the severity of impact. The fire situation remains highly active, and authorities must wait until areas are declared safe before making formal assessments.
How much was this a global tragedy, ecologically speaking? What has the world lost from this fire?
Probably none of the common animals are going to be lost. There's enough the ones that are still, they said there are these ones that are endangered and all that. They are scattered around the continent. The ones that are most threatened are going to be the ones that are in small, rare species. Because if they happen to be a small population, the last one, and it's in a fire area, there may be no recovery from them. But most of the other animals will come back at some point in time. So, but to get back to what it was before, that's going to take a long time. Trees take a long time. As I said, the eucalypts come back fairly quickly, and some shrubs do as well. But the animals are probably going to take longer, assuming you don't have a very frequent fire right after it.
Exactly, the cycle of fires, if it doesn't repeat itself. And this brings me to the other question. There were some arrests made for arson fire there, but at the same time there were protests from environmentalists that blamed the climate change for what happened. What is your opinion in this discussion? Well,
I've talked to some of the people in Australia, and there is a lot of arson fires. But fire, that only gets the fire started. It's the conditions afterwards that cause the fire to spread so badly. So while arson fires are obviously a problem, what happens once it gets ignited is when you have problems. Because then right now the hot, dry conditions, a little fire becomes a big fire very quickly when the environment is the way it is right now.
So can it be related to the climate change?
Yeah, yes. Right now, depending on what you believe in climate, the climate is changing. What the cause of it is not important at this particular point. We can see it changing everywhere in all kinds of animal movements from the different species. We have the same thing in this country in the West. We find that we are expecting a much hotter fire season every year into the future. That's what Australia is seeing as well. So it is driven by climate change. At least the way things are going right now. But it's pretty clear that there is a change in climate. The science says that the climate is changing without going into necessarily why, although there is a close correlation between human population and CO2 in the atmosphere they're just like parallel lines. So as the population goes up, more CO2 in the atmosphere, the Earth warms more quickly.
But that means that Australia only cannot really win the battle of climate change.
No. Yeah, the climate doesn't have boundaries. It goes across the globe, and so no country can work alone. It's either all or nothing if we're really going to solve the problem. The whole Earth needs to get involved in it, and that's a tricky route to go.
How about the United States? There's so much discussion about climate change, some believing, a group no, a group yes, and discussion and debate. What do you make out of this?
Well, again, it's not, the discussion I think is more about who's causing it. But the reality is it doesn't matter who's causing it. We need to anticipate the fact that we know that through the science, we know, don't have to even look at science, just look at the melting glaciers, look at the rising waters in the ocean. We're going to have to deal with this at some point. The sooner we realize that we have to do something about it and start spending money to do something, I'm not sure what that means, by the way, but start looking into what we can do. The sooner we accept that, the more likely we're not going to get in as much trouble as we're going to get into anyway.
I was listening to an interview of the Prime Minister of Australia that was pushing for innovation.
We can do something to minimize the impact, but individuals can do a certain amount. Big industry can do probably even more. But as long as we're a coal-based society, we're going to have problems because we're just adding more CO2 to the atmosphere. The sooner we can move away from that, the better. And so in Australia, the bottom line is it takes money.
What do you mean? Can you be more specific there?
Well, there's actually two parts. One, the money can go to the different government agencies. To control the fires in Australia and the ones here, we need sufficient resources going into reducing the fuel loads, crews that can go out and fight fires, responsive systems and all that. So it's going to take money, and right now I don't see that in either country being a major push. The other money is actually, I'm talking about, it's the money of the industrialized part of not the part of the world, but those people, the large industries, coal-fired plants and all those kind of things that, we've removed a lot of the control of atmospheric releases in this country anyway. There are things that have been done before, and everybody kind of backing off from that now as if it's nothing we can do about it, so we're just going to let them go. So the other money is basically businesses finding ways to reduce emissions in various ways. And there's not just a matter of smoke coming out, there's also ways they can more efficiently do things. And I'm a biologist, so I don't really know what they can do, but my guess is, we talk about innovation, there's got to be a way to be more efficient at energy use. And some of that could be plants and all that running off solar energy or wind energy or things like that to reduce the use on coal.
Okay. All right. And how about me? What can I do?
Stop driving.
Well, not here in Omaha.
Well, not anywhere, most places in this country. But the point is that there are things there's two things that, this is my view, I think two things can be done by people. One, you can select the people that you vote for need to be ones that support your belief in an environmental system. I think that's probably the biggest thing you can do in the big picture. In the small picture, though, you can look at things that you're doing, like driving less frequently, driving more efficiently. If you have to buy a new vehicle, buying one that's more fuel efficient. Obviously, the idea is when you drive, part of the emission goes into the atmosphere, so the less you drive, the less it's going into the atmosphere. So instead of going to the store twice, just get planned ahead and go once. And it's nice if you can take a bike and all that, but we can't do everything like that in this country in particular.
Yes.
So there are things, recycling and all that are all things that can be done. They're saving, you don't have to get aluminum out of sand if you're saving the glasses and the aluminum material.
I can take my blame. I drive, and I can't
We all
walk
drive.
it.
How did I get here? I drove.
I do recycle, though, to give myself some credit for that. Can I plant a tree in order to clean my consciousness for this? Will it help?
Well, planting trees helps. It would be more help if they would stop taking down the tropical rainforest, because that's basically the lungs of our Earth, as is the ocean. But planting a tree in the right place, if it doesn't take too much water. Remember, when you plant trees, you've got to take care of them. Don't plant a tree if it's not going to be suitable for that area, so you have to take care of it.
I wanted to summarize a few things that
Sure.
I was reading about this,
Yeah.
and I got scared. Only last year there were so many natural disasters. There was fire in the Arctic, there was fire in Amazon, California, Venice was underwater. My country of origin, Albania, was hit by earthquakes. Yesterday we had a tsunami warning and ocean levels rising. So it doesn't seem to me that those are sporadic disasters or events without a connection. They are all related. What do we make out of these events?
Well, with the exception of earthquakes, which are part of the crustal movement, which is probably not directly connected to climate change, all those others are likely to be related to fire. I think the fires that were in the tropics, I think most of those are agricultural efforts. You know, the different countries down there are increasing, they're taking down the forest. So that may not be so much about climate change, but all the rest, Arctic and all that, exactly right. They're all about things getting hotter and drier and more easily burned on larger and larger scales with more and more fuel on the ground, more and more plant material on the ground. And that plant material either has to be moved one way or another. You can move it physically or you can move it with prescribed burning, as we talked about earlier. But somehow if we don't get to that control level, we're going to have increasingly and more intense fires. And that's a concern of both U.S. and Australia and probably elsewhere.
Is the population of this world ready for that global mentality?
No. And I'm not sure they will. We have so many different societal makeups, from China to the U.S. to Australia to Germany. You pick it, Albania, you pick them. They're all very different. And I think the way we usually work is we wait until we're in a disaster. So if you've not seen the movie Independence Day, it brought, an alien force to bring us together as a country, as a world. That may be what we need, some sort of environmental disaster that's so widespread that we know we have to do something. But then you're always doing it after the fact, after the horse is out of the barn, so to speak, after you're in trouble. Yeah.
Thank you for giving us some thoughts on that.
Well, it's a biologist's perspective but I have been there a number of times, so I do have a feel for the country, and a love for it too.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, thanks.